Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Zimmer, and I wanted to do another video called The Departure and the Snare, in which I add a few things to the last video in regards to the eclipse and so on. So let's get started. Oh, by the way, this picture is, it's Ellison, I believe, is the name of the village, but it's one of the last places that the eclipse sees before it goes off into the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so last time we talked about a 40-day warning like Jonah and tied it into 111 days. This is 12/19/23 to 4/8/24 is 111 days. 12/19/23 to 12/22, which was the galactic alignment, is 1 + 1 + 1 days or 3 days. And February 28th this year to April 8th is 40 days or 1 month and 11 days. And we can look at this a couple of different ways because there's, in what we've been finding before, there's a dichotomy in regards to the eclipse, in regards to the rapture and all that, that we have a rapture and some good things happening on the one side, but then we have judgment and some bad things happening on the other. So this Strong's G111 is lawless, and that seems to be speaking to the judgment side. But there are also three scriptures that I think tie into this as well. Acts 1:11 is where it's talking to the men of Galilee. Why do you stand gazing up into heaven? The same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven. So this was talking about the ascension. And there's another one in Romans 1:11 that speaks about a spiritual gift being imparted. And the last time we looked at a gift in regards to the time, the 8:53, and the 2:02:02, which is the time of the eclipse totality in Carbondale, Illinois, and we saw that there's a gift involved. And in Romans 1:11 here we see a spiritual gift, and then if we go to 2 Corinthians 1:11, and it talks again about the gift granted to us through many. So it's talking about taken up from you into heaven, in other words, something akin to the rapture, and then it talks twice about a gift in Romans and Corinthians. So this is rather interesting in regards to the 1:11 and the 40-day warning. Okay, so, and I wanted to say something about the penumbral lunar eclipse that happened on March 24th and 25th. The maximum was on March 25th at 7:12 UTC, 2:12 a.m. Carbondale. And if we look at Strong's, 324 is to receive or to take up, and 325 is deliver. And it's as if our usage is, so the earth producing plants, yielding fruit, etc. So I thought that was rather interesting in regards to the dates. And then if we take the dates and do a day count to April 8th, the eclipse, we get 14 and 15 days respectively. And the numbers 14 and 15 signify both deliverance and rest in the Bible. Also, the 2:12 a.m. time in Carbondale, if we look at Strong's G212, we come up with boasting and pride and trusts in the stability of earthly things, or an impious and empty presumption. So we have this, again, we have this dichotomy. We have on the one side, we have the people that are prideful and trusting in stability of earthly things, and then on the other hand, we have the body, or the church, to take up, and the earth giving up its fruit. And if we take a look at 11/11 last year at 8:53:23 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, this is from Coos Bay, we had Venus, which is near conjunction with Zaniah, the sort of the elbow of Virgo. And I think I brought this slide up before. This was there's a tie into the prodigal son, where it talks about in Luke 15:30, 153 is in that, like the 153 big fish. But as soon as this thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, and Zaniah, one of the meanings of the name is harlot, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. So in other words, this is Venus representing Jesus, and he is coming to redeem, just like the prodigal son who returned home and was celebrated for returning home and being delivered from death into life. And we have something akin to this happened on March 25th, where the moon was near Zaniah in Virgo, just like Venus was. And that was at 2:12. That was at the maximum, as seen from Carbondale. So I thought this was rather interesting as well. It's kind of reminiscent of the Venus being by Virgo. Now it's the moon. And then we have something interesting coming up on the 7th, the day just before the solar eclipse. We have a Venus-Moon conjunction, Venus-Moon, where the moon occults Venus on the 7th at 8:53:23 a.m., and this is as seen from Mazatlan. So we have an occultation that's telling us something about that time, 8:53:23, that we found in Pi a long time ago. And we did a subtraction on that from the 20202 time in Carbondale, and we found that it was a spiritual or a God-given gift, and it related to the rapture. When the eclipse begins on the left, the moon is very bright. The eclipse maximum, it doesn't really dim that much, but you can see on the left was the beginning, and on the right is the maximum, which is slightly dimmed. And then moving to some news, Alaska Airlines plane whose door panel blew off midair was scheduled for maintenance, and this was Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 on January 5th this year, sparking investigations into why that they discovered no bolts on the door panel. And this is 1-5. The number 15 symbolizes rest, and it's in the year 2024. So this is the positive side of the dichotomy, showing us that that we're going to see rest, that the church will see rest in 2024. And then if we look at the flight number, G1282, it means to be cut to the heart. And these people, I'm sure, were frightened when this happened midair. And it also means one of the usages is to be sawn through mentally. So it's not talking about physical. It's talking about mental anguish of some sort, fear of some sort. So I thought that was rather interesting. But there's also this imagery of a door being opened, like we saw in Revelation 4:1, was it? I think it was 4:1. Anyway, a door being opened in heaven. There were 177 people aboard the plane, including flight and crew cabin members. When the door plug fell off, it caused a rapid decompression, so I'm sure that did frighten them. But again, we have this door imagery, and I think it relates somehow to Revelation. A door stands open in heaven. And Strong's G177 means uncovered, and this literally, these people were uncovered as the door left, I'm sure. And in this video, I thought another interesting thing was the length of the video is 1 minute 53 seconds, like the 153 Big Fish. And there's an 1111 connection. The plane was delivered to Alaska Airlines on October 31st, and the airline put it into service on November 11th. So we have an 1111 connection. So a lot of numbers here that seem to be tied to the signs, the 1111 signs, and somehow to the eclipse and possible rapture. And this is a rather sad one here. This Nashville plane crash. Police identify 5 deceased as pilot, his wife, and 3 young children. The Federal Aviation Administration and National Transportation Safety Board are now investigating what caused the aircraft, referred to in radio recordings as a Piper PA-32R, to plunge out of the sky on Monday night, and this was on March 4th this year. Nashville, I'm declaring an emergency. My engine shut down. Dotsenko could be heard saying about 7:40 p.m. in an audio recording obtained by WYMT. The single-engine plane ultimately crashed near mile marker 202. So here we are with this 202 number again. And this was the most important day count because if we count 202 days from 9/19 last year when we had all those signs in Virgo which indicate rapture, we wind up at 4/8 this year, April 8th, the eclipse. So in a sad sort of way, this seems to be pointing towards April 8th. Interstate 40 eastbound in West Nashville, a neighborhood about 3 miles from the airport. And this is 5 days after the 40-day warning was given. 5, of course, is the number of grace. So, but this was a sad one, I thought. But that number, very prominent, mile marker 202. Here's an interesting one. Here's what the 153 pin means at the State of the Union address, and this story was on March 7th. The 153 pins passed out during State of the Union address. 153 stands for the number of days that the hostages had been in custody in Gaza. Representative Brad Schneider passed them out to many Democrats, and doesn't decided to support them. And if we go from the February 28th, the 40-day warning, to March 7th is 8 days, and there's the 8 fits, I think, into the April 8th eclipse. And the 153, of course, representing the 153 big fish. Interesting stories. And here's another one, the fire. This is when we had the fires on the Panhandle in Texas, and fire threat swells over plains as massive Texas blaze still burns. A dangerous recipe for wildfire conditions will brew, or has brewed now, across the plains on Monday and again weekend or midweek because of abnormally warm, dry, and windy weather. And this is the National Weather Service has shown where there are red flag warnings on the map, and it looks like a huge number 7 on America. And another story, 2,000 earthquakes in a day. Hammer fault line off Pacific coast. A volcano submerged under 4,800 meters of water. There's that 4/8, again, the date 4/8, April 8th. Those numbers popping up again. Of water off the coast of British Columbia set off 2,000 earthquakes in a single day earlier this month, March 6th. The ocean floor is being ripped apart at the Endeavour site off the coast of Vancouver, and this was on March 23rd. And there's a video of this one. The length of this video is 1 minute 52 seconds. And some say that the 152 stands for 153 big fish minus 1, which represents Israel. And I wanted to pop the 84-week timeline back up there again. You've seen this in the last video because I added to it one little thing. If you add the 40-day warning into it, now we have 8 pairs of day counts pointing directly to April 8th, and they're mirror imaged across April 8th from side to side. We have at the top 15 weeks, 3 days of the 153 big fish. Then we have the 101 days, which points from 10/17 on the Hebrew calendar, which means prize. And then we have the 202 days, which is probably the most important day count, which includes 55 representing Jesus, 125 representing the church, Revelation 12:5, the child being caught up, and then 22, of course, chapter 22 of Revelation, which describes heaven and the river of life, and then 206 days, which includes all that plus an extra 4 days for the 4 days bookending April 8th. And that also, we saw that in Jesus' life. He had 4 years at the beginning and 4 years at the end of his life. The 4 years at the end were from the, I think it was 26 AD, when he started his ministry, when the Holy Spirit came down, and he started his ministry up till 30 AD. So that's the 4 at the beginning and the 4 at the end. And then we have the 180 days, which is including just Jesus and the church. 55, these are angles that came from the measurements from the in Revelation, where we're looking at New Jerusalem city. And you can get angles of the city from that if you do calculations. So the 55-degree angle, of course, points to Revelation 5:5. And then the 125 for the church points to Revelation 12:5, where the child is caught up. And then if we pop down to 177 days, we have on the left 177 days, and we have 177 on the right, but we also have 3 days inclusive for the Feast of Trumpets. So we get a 177, 178, and 179, which mean uncovered, uncondemned, and endless. And then the 40 days, if we add the 40 days in, the warning was given on 2/28, and that's 1 month, 11 days, or there's that 111. And on the right-hand side, 40 days goes to May 18th, which is the eve of Pentecost, or you could call it Pentecost at sundown. And then finally, we have 125 days, Revelation 12:5, where the child is caught up, actually coming from 12:5, the date 12:5 in 2023, and counting to April 8th. And then on the other side, 125 pointing to 8/11. So all in all, we've got 8 different pairs of symmetric day counts, symmetric about April 8th. And it's interesting because this whole timeline now, I believe should, unless I find something else, but I haven't for quite a while now. It's a complete timeline because it even says G206 on 1031, which means the end. So we actually have a place where it says the end. And I wanted to show this slide again because I didn't stress one of the numbers that was involved. This is about Texas, and Texas is a huge milk producer, and I think it's either 3rd or 4th in the country, but there are several other huge milk producers, including California. But anyway, milk producer, and then also Uvalde, which is going to see total solar eclipse on April 8th, has been called the honey capital of the world. So we've got huge milk producer and world-class honey producer for Texas. So you could literally call Texas or the United States the land of milk and honey, or the promised land. And if you look at Numbers 14:8, we have that phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey. And then if we look at Leviticus 20:24, we have the phrase again, a land flowing with milk and honey. So those two verses are tied together by that phrase. And Numbers 14:8, the number 14 is associated with deliverance. And then we also have a 4:8 in there, the April 8th date. And then Leviticus, of course, 20:24 gives us the year. And these two verses are tied together by that phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey. And it's as if it's talking about either leaving a land flowing with milk and honey because judgment is going to fall, or entering a land flowing with milk and honey, meaning heaven. So there's the date, 4/8/2024. And it's also associated with 14, which is deliverance. Now that phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey, is used 4 times. It's used again in Exodus 3:17 and Exodus 3:8. And those are both about God bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, saving them from the Pharaoh and all that. In 3:17 is by constraint or by force. And we see by force in Harpazo, which is related to the rapture, by constraint necessarily, by force, being caught up, that type thing. And then G38 is holiness and sanctification. And holiness, of course, is we're called to be holy, we're commanded to be, but also we gain holiness through Jesus Christ our Lord. So I thought this was interesting. This actually gives what looks like the date, and it says it's deliverance, and it seems to be saying deliverance on April 8th, 2024. And Nisan 17, regarding the resurrection that happened on Nisan 17, which fell in the year 30 on April 8th. But Some still cling to the AD 33 death and resurrection. And if we look at the Roman calendar and compare it to the Hebrew calendar, we look at Nisan 17 in the year AD 33 corresponds to April 6th in the year AD 33. So that's not the day of the eclipse this year. But we find an interesting thing if we go to AD 30, which we have sort of proven, many different ways that has to be the year that was the death and resurrection of Christ. Nisan 17 was April 8th on the Roman calendar. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see the bottom left, Nisan 17 is in the last column, third up from the bottom. And then if we compare that to the right-hand side, the last column, third up from the bottom, we see that that's April 8th. So the resurrection, which happened on Nisan 17, was also on the Roman calendar April 8th, the same day, the exact day of the eclipse this year. Okay, so clues to end times chronology. The phrase "first will be last, last will be first" can be found 4 major passages: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the parable of the vineyard in Matthew, it's something funny happens at the end of the parable. The phrase is actually reversed, and we see the phrase twice in Matthew and then once in Mark and once in Luke. And the synoptic gospels, the biblical order is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and this seems to tell us that the end times order will be Luke, Mark, and Matthew. And if we look at the end time audiences, and this has been said by a number of watch people, that the end time audience would be Luke written to the church, Mark written to the sleeping church or the left behind church, and then Matthew, of course, is written to the Jews. So I just want to establish the order. And if we look at a reverse chronology in the end times, Daniel 9:24 seems to imply the 9th of Av in 2024, perhaps. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. So if we look at that, in ancient times, 69 weeks of Daniel led to Jesus cut off, resurrected, and ascending. And that was the order in the ancient times. The order in end times would be death, resurrection, rapture, and then the 70th week of Daniel. So it's reversed. The ancient times, the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, is sent out. And then in the end times, the Comforter will be removed with the church. Ancient times, it's highly plausible the total solar eclipse of June 15th, 763 BCE bolstered Jonah's 40-day warning to Nineveh to repent. And the eclipse was at the start of those 40 days. In the end times, on February 28th, a 40-day or 1-month, 11-day warning ending on the April 8th 2024 solar eclipse was given. It's highly plausible the rapture will occur during the eclipse. So the eclipse, or the order is, the eclipse is at the end of the 40 days. And finally, there's a code in the number pi, 4884. In ancient times, the Lord Yahweh, which is the Tetragrammaton, his name is 4 letters, saved 8 people from the flood. And then in the end times, that may be reversed. On the 8th of April, or 813, either month, the 8th month, where the 9th of Av occurs, and then Yahweh 4 saves the woman from the Satan's flood. Okay, and then we looked at Numbers 10:11, which gave us a clue to the time, 20202, and over Carbondale, Cairo, and Rapture, Indiana. And Nishimura and Jangalovich, they had a conjunction. Jangalovich is 1734, it's at the time of 1734, and which was alluding to Luke 1734. And we also have, I want to set up the imagery here, we have 2023 going to 2024. Is it perhaps God looking at it as though the year changes at Nisan 1 instead of in January, perhaps. And then there's a 5783 going to 5784, another 3 to 4 transition. 5993 to 5994, which would be a more accurate Hebrew year, because we're going towards the year 6000, which is the start of the millennial reign. And 3 going to 4, Gimel Dalet, in other words, a man walking towards a door. That's the imagery. And Luke 17, we went through this the last time. I just showed briefly. 2 men in one bed, the one shall be taken, the other left behind. 2 women shall be grinding together, the one shall be taken, the other left. 2 men shall be in the field, one shall be taken, the other left. So we get a 222 or 20202, which seems to be pointing towards the time. And then they answered, and this is talking about the body or the church, and they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles, possibly the angels, be gathered. Okay, so going to Luke, I want to show you a few things in Scripture that where they're omitted in one and shown in the other. In Luke 21:7, the disciples ask about the end. So they ask, Teacher, when will these things be? What will be the signs of the things to take place? And then in 21:8 through 11, there's that 8:11, Jesus gives an answer. He answers, so be not deceived. And then it goes on, rebellions and nation rising against nation and all that. But he bookends it. At the very end, he ends with his answer with great signs from heaven. And we've seen the eclipses, galactic alignment, signs in Virgo, and so on. So we have that 8:11, which, is a sort of a tie-in, I think, to the no one could find 8:11. 8.11 billion people never happens because the rapture prevents it. And the phrase, these are the beginning of birth pains, does not appear in Luke. We know it happens in Matthew, Mark, but this does not appear in Luke, possibly alluding to that we're not seeing the beginning of birth pains being established. We're not going to see anything beyond that. So anyway, Luke 21:28, and when these things come to pass. So he's telling us in Luke, when these things begin to come to pass, the church will see these things beginning to come to pass, but to tell us to look up because our redemption draws near. So we're not going to see the rest of it. That's probably why we don't hear the phrase, these are the beginning of birth pains. We're not going to see any more than that. And then again, the phrase, your redemption draweth nigh, only appears in Luke. And Strong's 3803, pages or snare, the use is snare, trap, or noose, is used in Luke 21:35. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. And the word snare is not used in Mark and Matthew. And I just wanted to say that this absence implies that the trap has already been sprung. And Matthew and Mark, it's not necessary to say that anymore because the cat is out of the bag. Luke 21:36, watch therefore and pray that you always be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. So again, a message to the church that we will, if we pray and we're counted worthy, we will escape these things will come to pass. And none of the synoptic gospels contain the word apostasia, meaning departure, but it's mentioned in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 regarding the day of the Lord. And I think the day of the Lord is what we've been looking at from Nisan 1 last year until almost Nisan 1 this year, or the last day of that day of the Lord would be 29th Adar II, which is April 8th. And Luke, interestingly, has a total of 24 chapters. And we might even be seeing that date in Luke. Luke 21:20 through 24 is the destruction of Jerusalem. And it talks about when you see the Jerusalem surrounded by armies and so on and so forth. And then down in verse 24, it says, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So is this possibly giving us the year and telling us that the times of the Gentiles are going to be fulfilled this year? And then Luke 24, which again, pointing towards that year 24, and then 4 through 8, is the resurrection as told by two men. And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabout, behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. And as they were afraid and bowed down their faces to the earth, they said unto them, why seek you the living among the dead? He's not here, but is risen. Remember how he spake unto you when he was yet in Galilee, saying, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And then he closes out with, and they remembered his words in the 8th verse. So this seems to be giving us the actual date, 4/8/24, in the resurrection. And being tied to the resurrection is also rather interesting, because the resurrection leads to the ascension. Okay, Mark, there is no Mark 24. Okay, so it's as if the sleeping church, so to speak, is not going to see this that happens in 24. They'll probably see the effect of it. In other words, they may not go in the rapture, but they will certainly know that it has taken place. So there's no need to give them the year, I guess. Mark 13:32, no mention of one will be taken, suggesting it's already happened. And then Mark 13:14 about the Great Tribulation. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, and then this phrase does not appear in Luke. So suggesting that the audience of Luke, the church, are not going to see the abomination of desolation set up. And then Mark 13:24, sort of indicating the year again, 24 and 13 may be some allusion to the 13 colonies in the United States. I don't know, but that's where I've seen the number 13 the most lately. But in those days after that tribulation, so now it's talking about the second coming after that tribulation, the sun being darkened and the moon will not give its light. But we do see in Mark that 4/8 symbology again. Mark 13:4-8, the disciples ask about the end and Jesus begins to answer. So this time we see the question actually included in the 4th verse and in the along with the answer. Tell us, when will these things happen? The signs are about to be fulfilled. Jesus began by telling them, in other words, he's answering. See to it that no one deceives you, and then rumors of wars and so on and so forth, into verse 8, where he hits that phrase again. These are the beginning of birth pains, or the beginning of sorrows in some versions. And that sort of ends the introduction to all this. It goes on. There's more description of the end times, but that's the introduction to it, 4-8. So it seems to be giving us the date again, 4-8 in 24. In Matthew 24:15, again speaking about the Great Tribulation, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, and so on and so forth, this phrase is only in Matthew and Mark, and not in Luke. Matthew 24:40-41, now we see this phrase again. The two men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, one left. But this time we only hear about it twice. We don't hear it 3 times like we do in Luke. So is this a possible allusion to 2:2 or 22, which represents heaven? Revelation chapter 22, the last one, gives us a description of heaven and the river of life. And it might also be alluding to 22 or heaven, where by this time they've gone. So this is sort of an explanation, I guess, to the Jews where these people have gone after the rapture. Mentioned only twice because one group has already gone. Matthew 24:36 and Mark 13:32 give you, but of that day and hour no one knows. And this seems to be talking about the second coming or the return of Christ. But we don't hear about that in Luke because likely the church, if we're raptured, will not see that. And then finally, redemption. Strong's G629, redemption and deliverance. This word is not mentioned in Matthew or Mark. And of the three, redemption is only mentioned in Luke. Okay, so now the date again, but this one is much more straightforward. The eclipse and the comet, 4/8/24, Matthew 24. Now the disciples' question is separated out of the verses 4 through 8. And I think that may be saying that something is different here. This is written to the Jews, and the rapture has already happened. So it gives the date, but in a different way. And we see the disciples ask, when will these things happen? What will be the sign? And so on and so forth. So they ask the question in verse 3, but then when we start Jesus' answer in verse 4, he gives his quintessential answer again, nation rising against nation, and so on and so forth. And then he ends it with, all these are the beginning of birth pains, in verse 8. So his answer spans from verse 4 to verse 8. Again, we're given the date, 4/8/24. More connections to a date. Well, this first one really is not a date, but in 1 Corinthians 15:51 to 53 talks about the rapture, where we'll all be changed in the instant, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trump. And 15 is in the center of all this. 15, of course, is rest. And then it's encompassed by 153, the 153 big fish. And then 2 Thessalonians 2:3, the day of the Lord, 20:23. And it's talking about the day of the Lord. So that's why I'm pointed towards this last Nisan 1 to April 8th this year, which is the end of the Hebrew year. Nisan 1 would be the next day, April 9th. That's why I'm thinking that this actually is the day of the Lord, because it's bolstered here and there. You see 2 Thessalonians talking about the day of the Lord, and it's 2:3:23 or 20:23. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away or the departure, some call the rapture, comes first and the man of sin is revealed. Now we get into some dates. 2 Timothy 4:8, again, we see that 4/8 date, April 8th and 24. And it talks about a crown of righteousness that will be given to me on that day, but also to all who have loved his appearing. And then going back to Luke 14:8, we see that 4/8 date, and then 14 for deliverance. And this is in regard to a wedding feast. So even the theme of the verse fits in with this. And then Revelation 14:8, the fall of Babylon. Here's the other side of the dichotomy. Babylon is fallen. In other words, here comes judgment on Babylon on 4:8. Strange that it has deliverance in there, but maybe that's dichotomy within the same verse. I don't know. Interesting, though. I thought it was interesting, so I thought I'd show you. Clues in Exodus and Numbers. Exodus 4:8, and I think this one was found by Aaron at Gadamenet. Then it will be, if they don't believe you or heed the message of the first sign, then they'll believe the message of the latter sign, and probably the last solar eclipse over America, meaning the latter sign. And then Exodus 20:24, to extend it to the year, it says, I will come to you and bless you. And so these are some additional things I found in regards to the 4:8. You see 2024. And if you look at the wording that's used in Exodus 20:24, H853, or the Aleph Tav representing Jesus, is used 3 times. And let's see here. Yeah, 3 times. And if we go to Exodus 24:15, which seems to represent 2024 and rest in the number 15, you see the mount being used 2 times, and H 2022, those are the numbers from Numbers 10:11, the clues from Numbers 10:11, 2022. So it seems to be associating that with the mount, which could symbolize heaven, and the cloud symbolizing the Holy Spirit. Numbers 10:11, it says that the cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle. But if we go back to Exodus 24:15, we have a cloud covered the mountain, or the mount. So a cloud in heaven at that point. Okay, let's switch gears. I'd like to talk about the recent planetary alignments. In the month of June, June 3rd, 2022, 5 planets line up: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And then a few days, that was for the whole month of June, by the way, and then a few days around March 27th, 2023, we have 5 planets line up again: Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Uranus, and Mars near the moon. And then April 3rd to 4th, 2024, we have 4 planets lining up: Venus, Neptune, Saturn, and Mars. And April 3rd, they're in Mexico, Sydney, can be seen. And then April 4th in Abu Dhabi, Hong Kong, Tokyo. Excuse me. And June 3rd, 2022 to April 8th, 2022 is 22 months and 5 days. So we have 22, which the number we've seen throughout representing heaven, and 5 is the number of grace. So with that, I want to ask 2 very important questions, because I think I made a rather large find. It's a short find, but it's a rather large find. First, I want to ask the question, why do all the planets line up in the field of view in stellarium on April 8th, 2024? So we've had, I don't think anyone has addressed this. They've talked about it, that there's a planet lineup, but nobody said it's all the planets. Why are all of them lined up except for the Earth? I mean, we're standing on the Earth, so it's excluding the Earth. All the planets lining up in the field of view on that day. And then I want to ask a further question: is there a connection to the Rapture sign, which was the galactic alignment, Venus in Libra, and the Moon Jupiter conjunction in Aries, and then all the other galactic alignments that this tied into with day counts and everything else? So this Rapture sign was actually quite detailed. It was a huge sign, which happened on December 22nd last year. So is there a connection from this planetary lineup that's happening on April 8th to that Rapture sign, the galactic alignment on December 22nd? So first off, I showed this to you a couple of videos ago, I guess. H853, of course, is the Aleph Tav, and we've also seen the Aleph Tav in the 3 eclipses over America. And then G853 is kind of like Harpazo. It's vanish away, snatch out of sight, put out of view to make unseen. So we have the Aleph Tav, and then on the other hand, the vanishing away with 853. And this one is the galactic alignment that happened on 1222 at 153. So regarding the 153 big fish, saying this is something about the rapture. And this is using the ecliptic of J2000. And if you do that, then you see with the horizon, the galactic equator, and that ecliptic form the Aleph Tav, or combination Aleph Tav, or let's just call it an Aleph. And you can see the Aleph in all 3. And we need all 3 lines to define the Aleph. We need the horizon, which is there all the time. We need the galactic equator, which is there because we're looking at the Milky Way galaxy. And then we have the ecliptic because we're looking at the sun. And that alignment requires all 3 to define it. Okay, so we have virtually the same thing happening if we look at the ecliptic of date, but we get a different time. We get 202, which is the day count from 919 to the solar eclipse on 4/8, but it's also the time that the eclipse occurs over Carbondale, 20202. And we can do the same thing again, and we see that we have an LF. And we need 3 lines to define this, because we have the galaxy on one, we have the horizon on one, and we have the ecliptic with the sun. Okay, so here is the planetary alignment, and I showed this in the last video, and I think I left the inset in there because that's rather interesting. The time when this is out over the ocean, and it's just starting over the Pacific Ocean, we can look at either Strong's G44, which means hook, or Strong's G45, which means anchor. So we have this nautical terminology, like Jesus is leaving on a fishing trip to get the 153 big fish, which I think is a really cool story. And so anyway, we're looking kind of close up at this planetary alignment, and then Pluto is in the reticule at the bottom, and then you can see the eclipse in Pisces, and then 12P Pons Brooks, of course, is the devil comet, but the wording also means water and small stream. And again, we're showing all of the planets minus the Earth and that comet. Okay, now you're probably going to see it right off the bat here, but this is what the find that I had, and I think this is why we're looking at a planetary alignment, and we only need 2 lines to define this. We need the horizon and we need the ecliptic of date, and those give us the 2 lines that will give us the Tav. So we had the Aleph in the past on 1222, right? During the galactic alignment, we had an Aleph at 2 different times, but on the same day. And here we have a Tav, which is occurring at this planetary alignment on 4/8 at 20202 Central Daylight Time, as seen from Carbondale, Illinois. And of course, you can only see this in stellarium because Pluto is below the horizon, so you wouldn't be able to see the whole thing. And it's during the daytime too. So unless that's an awfully dark eclipse, I don't think you're going to see the planets. So really, you need stellarium to see all of this. Okay, so that was my find. It's a rather short and sweet find, but I thought it was interesting that we see an Aleph on the day of the huge Rapture sign, the galactic alignment last year, and now we have a Tav on this eclipse day. And if we zoom in, I thought this was kind of interesting too, and we bring the constellations back in. The zoom in on that Tav right to the center of it is right about on Capricornus. And okay, I also put in Aleph 15 weeks, 3 days. So in other words, 153, like the 153 big fish, leads us to the Tav on 4/8. I thought that was interesting. And then April 8th, 2024, or 842024. And if we look at the first 4 numbers, it's 8420. In the Hebrew is Tav. And then zooming in on Capricornus, the constellation Capricornus name is Latin for horn goat or goat horn or having horns like goats, and it is commonly represented in the form of a sea goat, a mythical creature that is half goat, half fish. So now we have that dichotomy, that half fish, in other words, a reference to the 153 big fish or the church, but then we also have a reference to a goat, or the people who are left behind. And Capricornus is one of the 88 modern constellations and was also one of the 48 constellations. There's that 4/8 again, listed by the 2nd century astronomer Claudius Ptolemy. Okay, and then I thought I'd show this one again. This was the the sun being centered on the line between Xi2 Sagittarii and Nunci in Sagittarius. This happened on January 4th this year at 9:54 a.m. And 9:54 in Strong's is Beelzebub, or Satan is another name for Satan. And we know he's going to come to power once the Antichrist does. And the dates here, 1/4/2024, 14 is in there, which means deliverance. 144 is in there, which signifies judgment. And then 202 is in there, which signifies the day count. And it's also the time, 20202, of the eclipse over Carbondale. So it's a lot of numbers in there fit. And again, that dichotomy of deliverance on the one hand and judgment on the other. Okay, so also a lot of interesting finds in the number pi. And Drayton Bonnion came up with something interesting. He had a really detailed analysis, but I kind of boiled it down just a little bit because I wanted to show the one most profound find that he had, and this is a big one. God decided that the first sighting of 4/8/2024 would sit in the middle of an 8444. Okay, so you get 84482024444. So you've got the date right in the middle of it. The last three digits of the first 482,024 of pi are 726. So you've got, this is really interesting, you've got the date, 4/8/2024, and the last three digits of that count give you 726, or Harpazo. So this is literally saying the date, 4/8 and 726, Harpazo. Caught up by force, caught away, catch away, pluck, catches, pulling. And if we look at the number 726, let's see, was this in the same? Yeah, this was. Okay, 4/8. If we use the position 4/8/2024 and we include the 3 and the decimal point, we get from 24 to 26, 4/8/2026. And if we count after the decimal, we get 4/8/2022 and 4/8/2024. The interesting thing about that is it gives the end of it gives the actual date, but the 4/8/2022 gives the clue from Numbers 10:11, the 2022. I thought that was kind of interesting. So if we actually look at 4/8/2024, which is sandwiched in between 84 and 44, then we can look at the positions. If we include 3 in the decimal, we get something ending in 319 and 328. 319 is to be made known. 328 is to gird up, or in other words, be prepared. And then if we count after the decimal, we get 317 and 326. 317 means by force or constraint. And now we have this, what sounds like Harpazo. And then 326, to be alive again, to be restored to a correct life. In other words, this is the physical change from, a body that dies to one that is glorified. And then here again, we have this nautical terminology, G44, which means hook, and a fishing hook or a small hook. So we're back with that Jesus going on a fishing trip imagery. I thought this is really cool. Some variations of 8448. This is interesting. If we look in another place, we find the positions actually include 726 or Harpazo. If whether you include 3 in the decimal point or if you count after that. So you've got 726, and even the last one shows 24. So it's almost like saying 726 in 24, but within the position. And then we have 8448 sandwiched in between 730, which means man-child, and 450, which means raise up. So this seems to be symbolizing Jesus raising us up, I guess. And 8448, 2024, I believe this is another one at 15 million, at position 15,84473. Where is it? I'm sorry, 1.5 million. And the number 15 seen there twice, of course, signifies rest. 844, 820, 24 again. 281 on one side means verily, amen. And 77 on the other side means without charge. Or in other words, it's free. Salvation is free. And this is the number that I brought up to you a number of times before. And it looks like now, in hindsight, since the rapture did not happen in 2023, that was just the beginning of it all. That was the beginning of this timeline. And 726, of course, represents Harpazo, 2023, the year this started being released. 853.6, of course, the time. And then the position is kind of interesting here because the actual position gives the 4884. So 4884, whether we include the 3 in the decimal point or if we count after the decimal point. Excuse me. And then this is interesting because this is, if we look at 4884 in Strong's, this is Sin Harpazo, and this is actually kind of what seems like a more accurate word than Harpazo does, because this means caught, and then the usage is to seize by force, and the most interesting or the closest to the rapture, I think, would be to seize by force and carry away. So Sin Harpazo seems like it's even a more accurate rapture word than Harpazo is, to seize by force and carry away. And if we go to the next one for 4884, we see there's a 70, which means watch, 45, which means anchor. There's that nautical terminology again. And then 856, a place of sitting apart. I'm not quite sure how that fits in. 4884 again, and we have a lot of, in this particular find of it, we have quite a few numbers around it that seem to be relevant. 749 is chief priest, and then we have be brave, blameless, unrebukable, and then we have from another place, and then Christ the Lamb. And this was kind of interesting. I thought looking at 20202 would be interesting. And if you look on the left of that 20202, there's a 2202, which is the 2022 reversed from numbers. And this means, the numbers in this mean arm, deliver, man. So this seems to suggest the arm of God, delivering man, resist, and I would assume resist the lawlessness, and wait for, look for, and we're leaving Egypt. 222 is of Alexandria and is sort of coming out of Little Egypt in a sense. And 2024, we have another abstinence, sincerely, man, and holiness seems to be a direction. And 853.23, that's part of that time that I showed you before in the year 2023. This says without rebuke or blameless, self-willed, reconcile. So if you are self-willed, I guess reconcile, in abundance. And then 853.23 means called to sail away. Here again with the nautical terminology, to sail away, and then newborn, just like the child being caught up, a newborn. And 853.24 now this year, holy saints, holy one, brethren, exceeding joy, a fishing hook, deliverance, because there's a number 14 there, and then 144 is judgment. So again, all the rapture imagery is there. 853.24 again in a different place gives us unspeakable, indescribable, to find out by search, an answer, to unveil or uncover. So this seems to be talking about what we're doing here. In other words, in this year, 2024, all this stuff is going to be found out by search, and we'll get answers, and it's being unveiled right now. The books are being opened. 2024, bookended by 577, means to throw off or to throw overboard, cast aside. So that this may be, again, nautical terminology, and this seems to be those who are left behind, I guess. And then 2024, surrounded by true and receive. And then 2024 again, surrounded by 726, which of course is Harpazo. And then 482 is overlapped and it says help. And 826 is to shine forth. And this is kind of interesting because I had seen some other videos where the watch persons had said they thought that the event or the rapture might happen on the third day, and I think that's on the third day of the eclipses, but anyway, the third day after the eclipse, so that would be April 10th, 2024, but we get a different theme here. If we look at that, we have 46, which is undressed, in other words, kind of an embarrassing situation, being undressed, and then 453 is overlapped on the year 2024, foolish, unwise, not understood, unintelligible, not understanding, and then finally 538 means deceive, to cheat, beguile, or deceive. So in other words, it seems to be telling us very strongly that no, there's nothing to this date. This is not going to be the rapture. That's what it seems to be saying. If you look at the 2 years together, 2023, 2024, because it's likely the year of the Lord, and it says choose, seeing, acceptable, apostasia, which is the falling away or departure, and then light bringer and higher to a more honorable place. So this is interesting because if we look at both of those years back to back, it seems to be giving us rapture imagery again. Excuse me. Really Me 3573 said, my thoughts 4/8/2024 is another sign, maybe the last sign. We are heading towards total forgiveness on 7/7. From when the earth rang like a bell, 11/11 to 7/7/2024 will be 5 years, 7 months, 26 days, which contains 726. This is a really cool find. This is really interesting because it contains 5, which is the number of grace, and then, of course, 726, Harpazo. But it's a standalone. It's the only message of its kind. I don't see anything else pointing to 7/7. If I did, then I might take more heed to that or more notice that might be the rapture, but I don't think so. I think there's so much pointing to 4/8. This might be an after message, something confirming what had just happened on 4/8. But interesting, that's a cool find. And then Dunamis 333 found something interesting too. The raise up at the last day, in other words, the last day of this year, 29th of Adar II, which is 4/8. And in John 6, it says this phrase 4 times. In 39, 40, 44, and 54, if we sum those, we get 177, and that means uncovered. So that was a really cool find. And I wanted to say thanks again to Daisy Tetro for showing us Strong's Hebrew Concordance H853, the Aleph Tav, which some believe is the signature of Jesus as his title, the first and the last. That has gone such a long way. That has been produced so many great finds, and I just wanted to say thanks again, Daisy. That was a really cool find. Okay. And then the Aleph Tav, there's a lot more math that goes along with this. I'll just throw a few more things at you. 853 minus the two numbers that were given in the great sign, 666 and 153, gives us 34, which is approximately the age at which Jesus was crucified, died, and raised again. He was actually 33 and a half, most likely. And it's also 3 to 4, the transition, which we think is going to happen this year, 3 to 4. 853 minus 153 big fish is 700, which means to please, and I serve, and Jesus, of course, came to serve. And 853 minus the 666 gives us 187, which means to be fully ripe, and that's used in Revelation 14:18. And another angel came out from the altar which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And this passage contains 14, which is deliverance, and 18, which is bondage. Okay, so there are also 13 Carbondales in the U.S., starting from California and ending in West Virginia. There are 7 near the path of the total eclipse, ranging from Texas to Pennsylvania. I thought it was interesting that Illinois State Route 13 and U.S. Route 51 form a cross over Carbondale, Illinois. Also, there's a Carbondale, Colorado, with a population of 25,900. If we disregard the zeros at the end and we just look at the 259, Strong's 259, to be taken, usage is a capture to be taken. There are 13 states in the path of totality, ranging from Texas to Maine, and 7 alphas and 7 omegas. Six alphas are from Oklahoma to Arkansas, and then Pennsylvania contains a neighborhood with a road called Alpha Road. So we have essentially 7 alphas. And then omega, we have 6 states from Arkansas to Illinois, but then the 7th would be Omega Road in Elliston, Newfoundland in Canada. And then here is Elliston. Omega Road is shown with the asterisk. And this is one of the very last places the eclipse shows itself before it goes off into the Atlantic Ocean. And I thought it was interesting that Omega Road is at 48 degrees. There's that 48 again. And then 153 shows in the middle of that. That's all I have for you. I thank you for watching. And I just wanted to correct something that I showed last time. 1017 plus 202 days. It should be 202 over 2. Actually 101 days, because it's in the middle of the Rapture sign on 919 to 48. And thanks for watching. God bless.